Spring is here, and the deals are hotter than ever at Shack Shop. Turn heads with stunning bikinis, now on sale. Explore the deep with cutting-edge underwater drones. Gear up for adventure with durable tents for every trip. Ride into spring with unbeatable deals on bikes. Fresh styles, women's fashion, and must-have looks, all discounted. Don't miss the Shack Shop Spring Fling Sale. These prices won't last. Shop now and make this spring unforgettable, only at Shack Shop.
A newly filed federal complaint has intensified scrutiny around the campaign finances of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, raising complex legal and ethical questions about how political funds can be used and where the line is drawn between professional services and personal benefit. At the center of the issue are 3 payments made in 2025 by Ocasio-Cortez's campaign committee, totaling $18,725. These payments were reported in federal filings as leadership training and consulting. However, a watchdog group now claims those descriptions may not accurately reflect the true nature of the services provided. The complaint and who filed it. The complaint was submitted by the National Legal and Policy Center, a nonprofit known for filing ethics complaints and monitoring government accountability. The organization formally requested an investigation by both the Federal Election Commission, FEC, and the Office of Congressional Conduct, OCC. According to the filing, there is reason to believe that campaign funds may have been used for personal psychiatric services rather than legitimate campaign-related consulting. The complaint itself does not present definitive proof of wrongdoing. Instead, it argues that the circumstances surrounding the payments justify a formal inquiry to determine whether any rules were violated. Why these payments are being questioned. The controversy hinges on the identity and professional background of the individual who received the payments, Dr. Brian W. Boyle, a Boston-based psychiatrist. Boyle is described as an interventional psychiatrist, specializing in the treatment of mental health conditions such as depression, anxiety, and post-traumatic stress disorder. His work reportedly includes advanced therapeutic approaches, including ketamine-based treatments, an area of growing interest within psychiatric medicine. What has drawn scrutiny is the apparent mismatch between his medical specialty and the services listed in campaign disclosures. The complaint argues that there is no clear public evidence that Boyle provides political consulting or leadership coaching services typically associated with campaign strategy. That gap, according to the watchdog group, raises questions about whether the payments were accurately described. The legal standard, campaign versus personal use. U.S. campaign finance law sets strict boundaries on how political funds can be spent. The key principle is that campaign money must be used exclusively for political or official purposes. Under guidance from the Federal Election Commission, an expense is considered impermissible if it would exist regardless of a candidate's campaign or officeholder status. This is often referred to as the irrespective test. If the expense would still occur even if the individual were not running for office, then it is generally classified as personal and therefore cannot be paid for with campaign funds. Examples of prohibited personal expenses can include medical or therapy services, mortgage or rent payments, personal travel unrelated to campaign activity, clothing for everyday use. The complaint argues that if the services provided by Boyle were therapeutic rather than strategic or campaign-related, they could fall squarely into this prohibited category. The importance of accurate reporting. Another key issue raised in the complaint is how the payments were reported. Campaign committees are required not only to spend funds appropriately, but also to disclose those expenditures accurately and transparently. Each expense must include a clear description that reflects the actual purpose of the payment. If a campaign labels an expense in a way that obscures its true nature, that could constitute a separate violation, even if the underlying service might otherwise be permissible. The filing suggests that describing psychiatric services as leadership training and consulting could mislead regulators and the public if those services were not genuinely tied to campaign operations. Timeline and financial details. The complaint outlines 3 specific transactions: $11,550 on March 10, 2025, $2,800 on May 15, 2025, $4,375 on October 1, 2025. Each payment was reported under the same category, creating a consistent pattern that the watchdog group argues warrants closer examination. While the total amount, just under $19,000, is relatively modest compared to overall campaign budgets, the issue is less about scale and more about compliance with the law. Even small violations can trigger enforcement actions if regulators determine that rules were knowingly or repeatedly broken. Ocasio-Cortez's public position on mental health. An added layer of complexity comes from Ocasio-Cortez's own public statements about mental health. She has openly discussed attending therapy and has emphasized the importance of mental health support, particularly given the pressures of public office. In past interviews, she has spoken candidly about managing stress and maintaining well-being while serving in Congress. In addition, she has been an advocate for expanding research into emerging psychiatric treatments, including substances currently classified under strict federal drug schedules. During a recent congressional hearing, she argued that certain substances such as psilocybin and MDMA show promise in treating conditions like PTSD and traumatic brain injury, and that regulatory barriers have slowed scientific progress. These positions are not directly related to the complaint, but contribute to the broader context surrounding the allegations. Broader political implications. The complaint arrives at a time when campaign finance practices are under increasing scrutiny across the political spectrum. Both Democrats and Republicans have faced questions in recent years about how campaign funds are used, particularly when expenses involve services that blur the line between personal and personal benefit. For high-profile figures like Ocasio-Cortez, such allegations can quickly become politically charged. Critics argue that strict enforcement of campaign finance rules is essential to maintaining public trust, while supporters often caution that complaints can be used as political tools to generate negative headlines without necessarily leading to proven violations. What an investigation could look like. If the Federal Election Commission decides to move forward, the process could take months or even longer. An investigation would likely involve reviewing financial records and invoices, requesting additional documentation from the campaign, interviewing relevant individuals, determining whether the services were campaign-related. The Office of Congressional Conduct could also conduct its own review, focusing on whether any House ethics rules were violated. Possible outcomes range from dismissal of the complaint to fines, required reimbursements, or referrals for further disciplinary actions. No conclusions yet. It's important to emphasize that at this stage, the complaint represents an allegation, not a finding of wrongdoing. Regulatory bodies like the FEC receive numerous complaints each year, and many do not result in enforcement actions. The burden of proof lies with investigators to determine whether violations occurred. As of now, Ocasio-Cortez's campaign and congressional office have not publicly responded to the complaint. The bigger picture. Beyond this specific case, the situation highlights an ongoing challenge in campaign finance regulation, defining the boundary between legitimate campaign expenses and personal costs. As campaigns increasingly rely on consultants, coaches, and service providers, those lines can become less clear, especially in areas like mental health, performance coaching, and leadership development. This case may ultimately serve as another test of how regulators interpret and enforce those boundaries in a modern political environment. For now, the focus remains on whether the payments in question were properly classified and whether they meet the legal standards required for campaign expenditures.